Honestly, I don't even know where to start with this week's episode of A Relatable Journey. T. Shane Johnson's journey is absolutely remarkable and truly unique. Without ruining all of it, here's kind of what happened. He was attacked by MS-13, left to die, flatlined 3 times, and what he says happened during the 3rd time, you want to hear. Here's this episode.
Every single major bone from my chin down to the upper part of my torso was broken. Flatlined for so long at that point that I should have been in a vegetative state by the time they brought me back. I come out of my body and it was really more of a subconscious conversation, like what you have in the back of the head a lot of times. And I was given 2 choices. You have to understand, like, the pain comes with the story. It's not like I tell the story and there's nothing there. As I tell you that the scalpel and they put the tube in, I can feel that scar.
All right, Shane. So, everyone came here because they want to hear your journey. I don't know if it's a relatable journey because of what happened to you, but it's certainly a wild one. Let's, just start from day one when MS-13 saw you and attacked you, frankly.
Yeah. It's so funny. I told this story between writing books and speaking across the world and going back and forth. And, especially this week's been a crazy week, sharing, what had happened. And, it's you and I had that discussion on that day. And look, I was stationed with 1st Reconnaissance Battalion in Southern California at Camp Pendleton. I was very excited about being part of the unit. It took me about a year to get over in that direction. And we were going through combat dive with the operator. So, we actually were training for pre-scuba prior to the operators going to combat dive in Coronado. So it's just, the Marine Corps doesn't do anything they don't succeed at. They can't just put you in a spot, you go take a course and, you didn't train appropriate for it. So it ends up, you train 3 or 4 or 5 months for a 3-month course. So that way that, you're just not going to fail at all. So we were, and I tell that for the story so it plays an impact later, but really what it came down to is, every day we were, we're in the pool, working in the pool for 8 hours. We're running 10 or 15 miles a day. Just the epitome of physical fitness and beyond when it comes to what we were able to do. And, our lung capacity was just amazing between, all the time we were spending underwater, doing specific training exercises for that, what we call tap and pass. And we just kind of, it was just brutal. You can't think of take enough calories in, just to try to maintain, keeping your weight. And finally, when we had finished kind of our 4-month course and the guys were getting ready to head out to combat dive, us newbies got about 3 days off, what we call a 72 in the military. And we said, you know what? I had a buddy of mine that just graduated sniper school. He says, I just graduated. We got a friend of ours that live up in Corona. He's like, why don't we just, take off for the weekend and get out of here and make sure we don't, get beat up or hazed. I was like, man, that sounds like a great idea. So he went ahead of me in his car and I said, I'll be there in about an hour, and jumped on a motorcycle. I come out of the back of the base. And of course, being in the military, you have all this gear you have to wear, reflective gear and everything, once you're part of, government property. And then when I came off the base, I'm a 19-year-old guy. I'm in great shape. I put a tank top on, jump on a motorcycle and head up to my friends. And as I'm coming off the back of the base, I kind of head down a hill, a Fallbrook area. And there's a lane one will go to the left to turn, and then one you can go straight through on the light. And there was the car that was in front of me turned to the left lane kind of slow, and I sped through to go through the light to go straight. And when I did, the car on the left-hand side turned right, and it hit me at about 45 miles an hour. And when I came off the motorcycle, I was kind of inverted, and I caught the corner of a brick house right across my chest here. And what had happened is basically every single major bone from my chin down to the upper part of my torso was broken. So my collarbone, shoulder blade, hand, all of my ribs, your entire chest cavity that you sit there, you push on was snapped in half. All of my major organs were lacerated. So the ribs had actually fractured and broken and started to cut into my major organs. So my kidney, my spleen, my liver were all lacerated. My lungs took 350 cent-sized pieces, punctures from the ribs. And I basically started to drown in my own fluid. When I hit the ground, my left bicep had caught the corner of the mirror and it had sliced open. So I was starting to bleed out pretty well on that side. MS-13 got out of the car. and started to kick me and rob me. So they were targeting military at that time, and it was more of an initiation process. So they thought, hey, this guy's dead, and they got in their car and headed out. And fortunately for me, I wasn't. So I took my right hand, put it over my left bicep, and I proceeded to walk 2 blocks to a fire station. And normally I tell people, I'm like, there's no way for me to really equate the pain or the experience that I went through. But I'll say, if you ever get a second, just try to hold your breath for 60 seconds, let it out, and then walk 2 blocks doing that, 1 full breath every minute. And it's really just like a constant drowning feeling for, however long it took me to walk that 2 blocks. Because all, my fluid was pushing into my lungs from the holes from all the blood that I had. And I was basically just drowning, trying to catch my breath throughout those 2 blocks to walk. At the same time, I've got blood bleeding out all over the place, so all over the ground. So it was very, very challenging moment. I get to the fire department. There happened to be a doctor on site. They bring in a helicopter. They bring it down to Bayflight. They put me in on it. And at this point, I obviously I'm struggling pretty bad. They decided to take a scalpel, cut over the right side of my chest, and start running chest tubes in. When they did the first one, I had 3 actually. And when they did the first one and they cut it and punctured through those ribs, you look at the right, just fluid went all over the deck of the helicopter. And at that point, that's when my lungs just kind of just like this, and I couldn't breathe at all. So they were trying to, you put the little thing on me to try to get where I could breathe. They were working on it, but it just was very challenging to try to do through that. And then I flatlined. So that was my first time dying. So I flatlined. You got to think, it's not like you see in the movies, or you see, when you've got an entire chest plate broken and all of these things shattered and broken, you're not doing compressions on someone's chest to try to get them come back. That's a pretty challenging thing, because really all you're doing is probably lacerating more organs, so, they put the paddles on me, boom, I came back. We get to the hospital, they land at the hospital. I go out again, I flatline again, boom, they bring me back. The second time I was out for a bit, I think they actually kind of had to work on me for quite some time before they took me off. We get into the hospital, they start to intubate me, put in all the tubes, get me prepped and prepared, and then I flatlined the third time. And then the third time was for quite some time. Matter of fact, we were having this discussion with the VA. I have all these appointments I have to go to, and due to my injuries, and they were kind of reading through the reports. We've been doing that a lot the last 3 months. And basically the doctor's explanation was, I had flatlined for so long at that point that I should have been in a vegetative state by the time they brought me back. But, some people may disagree. It depends on the day. But I came back, and I was pretty sharp considering. And then that was my third time dying. And I came back, and over a course of that time period, I spent about 6 to 7 months in the hospital, had to learn how to walk, talk, and breathe again. And that's pretty much the accident. What happened?
All right. So this is the easiest podcast ever. I just ask one question and let you go, and everyone's just exhilarated to hear this story. So that third time that you died, I know what happened. This is when you met God. Did you see God? Because it wasn't like one of those things where or I guess you tell the people, what was that experience like?
Yeah, and since the last time you and I spoke, it's funny, I spoke on stage with Kyle Carpenter, who's the youngest recipient of the Medal of Honor. He also flatlined 3 times. He took a hand grenade to the chest that he jumped on for his unit, or for his team. And it's weird. It's the only other person I've had a conversation with that has also flatlined 3 times. I've spoken to a few other people that have died and come back, but no one that's ever flatlined 3 times to come back. And it's just you just think you're never going to talk to someone like that. Mm-hmm. And the experience that he and I discussed was literally to the T the same. It is, it gives me chills just talking. It was literally to the T. So for me, it is kind of like you see in the movies. It's an out of body experience. There wasn't a tangible being there. There wasn't, God's figure or face. And when I reference the word God, I always say to a lot of people when I speak on this topic, like for me, it was my belief in a higher power, what I follow and what I believe in, to know that there's something above and beyond. So for whatever you believe in, it would be that same type of thing, same type of spiritual realization that you would have. And I come out of my body, and it was really more of a subconscious conversation, like what you have in the back of the head a lot of times. And I was given 2 choices, and it was, Will, like, I think maybe the best way to explain it is like in life, we have all these problems and issues that we think are important, right? Like things hitting us from so many different directions, right? In life, personal, professional, within ourselves, our own self-worth, our family, our kids, work, all of these things that are hitting us from so many different directions. So we just have constant noise. And very few times in our life do we ever get it where it kind of shuts down and we get that time to be able to just be truly with us and find out who we are. So I try to say, maybe if it's like the purest form of meditation, if there is that level of that, but imagine all of those problems, pains, issues, concerns that we think are important in our day to day completely going away. I mean, I can't even explain the euphoric feeling that you get or that I got during that moment, because I've never been able to get back to it as much as I've tried to chase it. It's the craziest thing. So that conversation was, you have two options. Option one, you can decide to die and go on, and I'm going to take care of you. And when I say that, I think a lot of us, especially like when we're athletes, we carry a tremendous amount of guilt if we quit on anything, because there's a lot that comes with that. So, but imagine saying it's not like being a quitter. It's like allowing, yourself to be okay with knowing you're going to go in this direction. It was not a guilt filling thing. It was just like, it's okay. You can choose this to be your time.
That's like, I think that's my favorite part of your journey in this story, is that God said to you, there was no guilt associated to it. It's exactly what he preaches in his word all the time, is that it's guilt free and that it's all about his love. And that was the most powerful thing when he told me this the first time, that caught my attention.
And I'm telling you, listen, there's a lot of challenges I've been through since then. To try to articulate that moment in our small little brains with this higher power, to be able to try to communicate it to people, it's almost like a guy who speaks for a living is a loss for words, because I'm trying to capture the words to be able to tell you, to explain to the audience that feeling. It is, there's nothing in this world that I've ever accomplished other than being a father that I can really try to get close to say, I mean, it was just, it was an amazing feeling. It was like knowing that second that if I decided to do that, it wasn't, I let people down or I dropped the ball or I was a failure or all these things. It was a complete opposite. It was,
you weren't burdened
it really
with what
was.
everyone was going to say on social media in that time?
Right. Yeah, no, not at all. I mean, it was amazing. It was, and I almost say it was an addictive high, to the point to where like, I don't know why I didn't choose it. There's parts that come with that sometimes. Like, why didn't I go that path? What could have been on that side? And I think being the type of person I am, risk versus reward, when you have an advantage over people, knowing that experience and being able to have those options, it allows you to go in completely different directions in the world. And of course, at the same time, you and I discussed, reality of it is he had the path chosen for me already. He just gave me free will to decide which direction I wanted to go, probably already knowing that what I was going to do, So, and then option
that's
two
door
was,
one. You obviously didn't choose door one.
Right, right.
What was
that's
door
right.
two?
So door two was, you can live and you're going to be in a lot of pain, but you've got to tell the story. And, it's funny, like when I say this now, it sounds so set up, right? But at the time, I had no clue what that meant. I wasn't a speaker. I wasn't on a stage. I didn't think I'm going to be telling the story. I thought I was dead, much less telling a story, or have a lot of issues and problems that I wouldn't be able to have a, quote unquote, normal life. But I knew that, I had worked so hard to get where I'm at. And when I had tapped into door number one and had kind of peeked in and knew that this was the alternative, if gosh forbid something went wrong, it was like having the biggest, nest egg in the world. Like, okay, no matter what risk I take, I'm good to go, So I always joke with people, clearly I chose door number two, jokes on you guys. And then I decided to live, and that was my moment with God.
I mean, you said at the time, like, it's not like you were T. Shane, who we know today, speaking and telling your story, because your story didn't exist back then. So who were you at 19 when you got attacked and you were killed 3 times or died 3 times and came back? And Who were you in your relationship with God? Was there one?
There wasn't. I was a very rage-driven, angry young man that it kept it all inside. On the outside, I was a very composed, structured leader that was excelling at high levels in the military. And I was top of my class. I was meritoriously promoted 3 times before I made it to the fleet, which normally takes most people about 2 years. I did it in about 5 months. I had just got to one of the most elite units in the military and in the Marine Corps. I was excelling at that. I was doing really well, and I was chasing away from a troubled, personal life back home as a young man to get away and to show others out of anger, not necessarily in a positive direction, that I will succeed at whatever cost. And I didn't. God and I had no conversation prior to that. We didn't. I didn't go to church. Matter of fact, I grew up in a very fire and brimstone type of town. So if you didn't go to church on Sunday, or if you didn't believe in certain way, I mean, even you have it. People say you're going to hell. You're going to hell. I mean, I had kind of a skewed view on of what that was. But after that, I now it's easy, right?
So
like it just is. It is what it is.
when you choose door number 2, you have no relationship with God prior to that moment. I imagine you didn't wake up and just all of a sudden have a relationship, because a relationship takes years to build. I mean, a relationship with God and Jesus, it's the same exact thing as one with you and I and any other human being. It takes a little bit. I mean, so what did that journey look like? How long did it take you?
It took a really long time. A really long time. We are very arrogant as humans. We think we got everything figured out. We really do. And I was angry. I was really angry because now my dream of doing all things that I want to do with the Marine Corps was gone. Physically, how was I going to go in a comp in the dive locker? How was it going to take deep dives? How was it going to jump out of planes? How was it going to do all the things that I was part of this unit to be able to do? How was I going to go finish sniper school? I can't stalk with my chest broken and all the pain that I get, be able to hold a rifle the right way. I mean, I had all these dreams that were shattered. So what do you do now? And that's your whole life. You escape everything and you're upset. You go through a series of emotions. First it was anger, then it was guilt. It was, why me? Because as you start to go through life and you feel, I'm not saying to other people, but personally, when you put this high level of pressure on yourself, am I living up to that expectation? I mean, you got to think there's a lot of amazing people in the world. Why the heck did God decide to choose me to live this life? And if he did, am I living up to that expectation or that debt that's owed, based on that loan that he gave me on life? Am I paying it back the right way? And that starts to weigh on you. Well, it can get you in some pretty dark spots because, I mean, generally, I think 99% of us, our self-worth is low. We don't think very highly of ourselves. We're always trying to find ways to fix things rather than just appreciating the perfection that God made us in his eyes. So it's challenging. And those were my challenges, throughout the years. And it didn't take until I would say maybe about 6 years ago when I was doing one of my runs across America where I shared a moment with a Marine that was going to commit suicide. And forever then it was like a light bulb went off. And then I've just been following that path ever since.
I mean, that's a pretty cool story in and of itself. I love that I know all these stories, so I can just set you up so easily. But that story, I remember when you told me, that one gave me chills because you weren't expecting it and how close he was to committing suicide before you arrived. So I guess just let me tee you up and you knock it out of the park here on another really cool story of how God used such a bad moment in your life to create good for somebody else and how you created good in somebody else's life too.
Yeah, I mean, I like it. My arms are covered in chills and legs now, like as you speak about it, because it's, man, I don't know, like after that happened and I got out, I went through all these losses and ups and downs. And, I was homeless here in Charlotte for 2 years. I went through a lot of struggles, trying to find the right thing, trying to get my mind right, rebuild and fail. And, look, I mean, it's typical entrepreneur life, I mean, those that take a lot of risk, a lot of times there's a lot of bad that comes with that. And hopefully at some point, a lot of good. And at the time you think that all your failures are failures. You don't realize that's really where the great things are coming from. You think that when things are going easy, that's the good stuff, when in fact the failures is what really truly defines our character. And I always say, we as humans purchase pleasure through, corporate platforms for our inability to endure pain or to embrace pain. And, as I went through those stages, basically defining and building my own book and story, I started to work into the veteran homelessness after when I went from homeless to building, a $200 million company. And as I started to grow and do more, I wanted to dig into that. I wanted to find out the mindset. I wanted to, here's the funny part. I think I'm so arrogant that I think I'm the one trying to figure it out, right? Like, I want you to pay attention to that as the audience. Like, here, listen to me even still now, being like, well, what I wanted to do, it had nothing to do with what I wanted to do. God had already built out this path and this plan, and I was just puffing it right along. I was just following right along, thinking that I'm the one that had it all figured out, right? So I went through these experiences, and I started to, develop a platform where I was partnering with the larger organizations, the corporate companies. And that's, what led me to what I'm doing today, where I started to run across America. And I would run 22 miles a day for 65 days straight. And I would partner with nonprofits and corporate companies. And I was kind of like the conduit for marketing to drive social responsibility, corporate social responsibility. And I knew that as a speaker, of all the speakers that I studied or paid attention to, especially the old school guys, the one thing that was really important about them is they were equally speaking in communities that need it the most, as well as corporate platforms where they were building a business. And you don't find that a lot now. You find a lot of speakers will go into a stage and they stand up and people pay a lot of money to come in. But what about the people that need it the most? What about that homeless person or that person that's got just life's just kicking them in the teeth quite a bit? They need a little motivation and inspiration. It's not like they're popping on podcast, they're just trying to figure out how they're going to eat today.
And so often in our society, we view homelessness as somebody like some crazy guy versus someone like you, who like they are all souls. They are individuals, or something went wrong along the way, and they need somebody to help them. Someone needs to lend a hand.
Oh, it needs a massive rebrand. I mean, it really does. I mean, because as I tee up this story, you're going to find that it's just regular people. I mean, 2008 was a great example of how people went through so many industries dissipated. People lost everything. It was just regular people out on the streets, and because of our the branding of what homelessness means, just like you said, people automatically associate that it's some type of scam, or that it's drug addiction, or that it's problems, when sometimes it's life. It's like a Mike Tyson, just right, a good right to the face. And so I started running across America. I started speaking to homeless shelters. I would sleep in homeless shelters. I would go in.
So when you say you run across America, I want everyone to know, I mean, you literally ran across America.
You got it correct.
From where to where?
From Florida to Southern California. So from Orlando all the way to Camp Pendleton, California.
Okay, I just want, this wasn't a figure of speech. This is literally Shane running across America.
And when I say it every day, so that you understand, even though we had these corporate sponsors, I was sleeping in a tent, or sleeping in a homeless shelter, or sleeping in a tent in a homeless community in specific areas. So, Louisiana, we would go into a place there was what they call a tunnel, and it was a tunnel where a lot of the homeless live. And I would go in there at nighttime, and I would sleep with them, and I would talk with them, have conversations. Sometimes you'd have shelters. You'd be able to go into shelters and you'd sit down and talk, and I'd come in and speak. Sometimes you'd have tiny home communities. Texas had quite a few of those. We'd go and I'd sit there for a night. We'd all eat, we'd talk, and we'd have conversations. And the stories I could tell you from both a good and bad are unbelievable. And that's what we did. So we had, during that first run across America, I had completed almost 1,800 miles, and I was in Las Vegas. And what I started to do is I would join marathons in addition to. So let me put this, kind of paint the picture here. So I would get up in the morning, Monday, right? And I was running a company at the same time. So I had a mortgage company like I do now. And I'd get up at 4. I'd run 22 miles straight. So think about pretty much a marathon, right? So I'd run a marathon in the morning, right? Before you guys even get up to start your day. I'd finish the marathon, right? And then I would go and I'd be on a speaking schedule. So most of the time, if I was leaving a shelter, it was structured to go to another shelter. And then I would hit that shelter. And as soon as I was done, I'd go into the shelter. And I usually would shower and shave in the shelter. I mean, I really wanted to be like a method actor, immersed in my entire environment and understand the day to day, so that I could see their perspective a lot better. So I went through that moment where I'd sleep in the shelter, I'd get up, we'd prep, I'd have breakfast with everybody, they'd try to figure out who I was. I'd get up, I'd speak, do that, wrap up, finish up, run my company via my computer for the downtime that I had and prep for the next speech. Go to sleep at about 9 at probably another shelter or a tent somewhere. And a lot of times the conversations would last a little longer than that. And then I was up again the next morning doing another marathon. And I would do that Monday through Friday. And then on Saturdays, what I found is that I started joining actual marathons. So because the audience was bigger. So we would call prior to, and I'd say, hey, listen, this guy's running across the country. He's doing 22 plus miles a day. Here's his story. Here's what he wants to do. Can we stand up on your platform and talk about it? So a lot of your big marathons that have pretty big audience. And that was kind of like a little marketing idea I came up with. So then on Saturdays, I would run 22 miles to the marathon, join the marathon, and then run the marathon. And then I would do the same thing. So when I got to Las Vegas, I had been doing that. I got to Las Vegas, they had an ultra, which was 40 miles that day. And so I was like, you know what? Let's do an ultra. Let's try it out. And like, you got to understand, like, I will eat you out house and home. I'm not your normal marathon runner. Like, I'm a 230-pound guy. I look like I probably would eat one of those marathon runners as I'm out there running as like a snack to keep going, And I set aside all those injuries that I have too, So I get up, I run 22 miles to the ultra and then do 40 miles. I did 62 miles that day. Wow. And it was in Las Vegas. So you've got, elevations, switchbacks. I mean, it was not fun at all, coming down. So I wrap up, I do 60 plus miles and I'm done. And now I also carried a 30-pound pack as well. So I'm 230. So I'm probably 260 running that whole time. And I finished like, I didn't even find out until like a year later, there was like 40 people and I finished like 8. I did it in like 8 hours, which was insane. I don't even know how. I thought I was last. I didn't know. And then it was like a year later, I was like, I never even checked to see how fast I did that 40 miles. And it was like 8 hours. And so they said, listen, hey, we've got to head over to this community, this kind of temporary housing community for the homeless, because I was partnered with Caesars Entertainment. And they said, we need you to come, speak to the Caesars Entertainment executives and the homeless veterans at the same time. Man, like as a speaker, that is a very challenging thing to do. I mean, you have 2 totally different types of mindsets. One that thinks they're giving for the sake of giving and taking a selfie and some pictures to say, look at what we're doing in our community. And other ones who were like, man, I'm just looking to have a place to live and, get a drink or something, just totally different personalities. So I'm standing there in the parking lot as we finish that up. I'm beat, man. Like I'm done. You got to think 1,800, 62 miles that day. I'm drained, but I realized that, I got to do it, right? It's just got to get done. So I stand up there and I try to create this dynamic, charismatic personality of delivery of speech between 2 different audiences. And as I'm starting to prep for the speech, I think to myself, like, how am I going to do this? Like, how do I go back and forth? So what I did is I said, you know what? I looked over to the veterans and I looked them right in the face. And I said, I would not be here today if you guys had not made the sacrifice you made to serve in the military. I would have not been and had all the great things I've had in my life and done all these great things had you not taken a risk to go out and join the military and serve this country. And I said, and you know what? No matter what branch you're in, right? No matter what time you serve, what you did, what your MOS was, I love you and thank you. Man, I've never seen so many grown men cry. Wow. Like they were crying, and I'm not like, tearing down. I mean, like snot bubbles, like they were bawling. And, I went back to to the Caesars Entertainment people. And I said, rather than writing a check and doing a hygiene kit, give them a hug, ask them what their name is, get their identity back to them. Let them know that they're a John, they're a Bill, they're a Steve, they're a Lisa, that they're not homeless people. Don't group them in, give them back a little bit of their identity. And I went through the speech that way. And I talked about, what we're talking about today and my experiences. And I finish up and I go to the truck and this guy comes over to me and he says, hey, Devil Dog. And, most time, it's a Marine when they say that a lot of times. And I was like, oh, what's up, Devil? And he says, do you have a moment? And I was like, sure. And I mean, like, well, I'm done, right? Like I just spent like an hour. I've ran, like, I'm so drained, man. Like this is the part where you as a human, you start to get very selfish, right?
Yeah.
Like you're kind of like, okay, like, and you forget why you're there because you're just physically, mentally drained. But I said yes. I said, let's go, right? Because what kind of person and hypocrite would I be if I just stood there and said, you're really important, and then I'm just not important enough for me today. So we go up to the second level of the housing portion, and we walk in, and as he opens the door, there's a gun sitting on the counter. And situational awareness kicks in for me big time. And I'm like, okay, I don't know if this is a good idea, And he looks at me and he says, "No, trust me, it's okay. Trust me." Now, you have to
Okay.
understand what he was saying, though. He was saying, "Man, everybody, no one believes me, no one trusts me, right? Like, no one takes me for face value. Can you please just not be that person?" That's what he was really saying. It wasn't just be like, "Oh, trust me," trying to sell me on it like someone else. It was really just, can you be the one person that actually listens and takes me for face value and not think that there's a work here? You have to be cognizant of that, right? Like, okay, roger that. So I come in and I sit down. Now, of course, I'm still a little on alert, and he says, "I have to tell you a quick story." Okay, get it out. Let's hear it. He says, I was a very well-known general contractor here in Las Vegas. I mean, I was doing really well. I was making a lot of money. I had a beautiful home, a beautiful family, beautiful dog, beautiful business. He's like, I'm a Marine. I was kicking butt. And he says, life, even when you're doing well, for those of us that we see, you see people that make a lot of money or do a lot of things, everyone thinks that if they got money, you don't have any problems and that they've got everything figured out. It's a horrible association. And he says, so everybody thinks that everything in your life is perfect. He says, look, man, I still have doubts, right? I still had, was I going to do great today? I mean, look, it's harder to keep it than it is to scale and get it. It's harder to be able to keep it. And he was like, so I was doing well and I had it together, but it was like, man, when you're doing it, there's challenges, there's stuff that happens. And he says, and I've got my own demons that I pushed to the side that I never addressed because I was so focused on trying to make sure this happened. And he's a Vietnam guy. And, he said, one day I just maybe, took a little drink. Right. And he's like, then one day I was with some friends, the wrong friends. And he's like, I'll do a little cocaine. Look, I'm an older guy. I can do what I want, or my business is successful. Like, it's not the end of the world. And he says, one day turned into every week, and then, every day. And then he says, then I realized I became a servant to a master, and the master was controlling me a lot more between the alcohol and the drugs. And then he goes, and like in anything in life, if you don't pay attention to it, it'll slowly start to go away. My business was having problems. And then, of course, my business having problems. What did I do? Drinking more drugs, right? Because I had the money to buy it. And then eventually, it started to cause problems at the house. And then I lost my business. And then I lost my house. And then I lost my family. And then I lost my kids. And he says, this morning, this was very recent. And he said, this morning, they took my dog. I mean, he was bawling, man. He's like, they took my dog. And, when I tell that story at first, and I talk about the dog, people are like, oh, the dog. And I'm like, I don't think you really understand what he was saying and what that meant. Understand that a dog, right? Like Andrew Carnegie writes an entire book about it, that a dog loved him unconditionally.
Right.
Whether he was on drugs or alcohol or what we perceive as a failure as society, the dog looked at him and said, dude, I don't care. I love you. And it was the last piece to the life that he had all together that looked at him with this amazing amount of love and felt safe and secure, right? Especially as a strong military guy, that's kind of his MO. And then this morning they came and took that away from him. The only thing left that loved him, only thing that appreciated who he was. And for him, when he lost that, he lost everything.
Yeah, that was it.
So he says, I reached under the bed here, grabbed my gun. He said, and I took it and I put it right in my mouth. Right. And I'm sitting here and he's showing this to me. He put it in my mouth and he says, I don't want to live anymore. I'm too alone. I'm a failure. He says, as he had it, and he was, his back was turned towards the door. So when they're going through the windows, they couldn't see him. But he said he had it here. And he said they were knocking, there's a bunch of military people. So they're knocking on the door and being like, hey, some jarhead's coming to run his mouth this morning. And he thought to himself, I'm a Marine. He goes, I got to go listen to this other Marine. Now he tells me, he says later on, as we finish this up, he goes, if you weren't a Marine, I don't think I would have listened. He was like, but you know how we are being Marines. And I was like, I do 100%. He says, so I had to come listen to you. He goes, so I listened to your story, and he's like, I'm crying. And I take a second to kind of stand over to the side. And he's like, I waited a long time to talk to you. He's like, all these people were coming and shaking your hand and doing whatever. And he's like, I sat there. I was not going to leave until I at least spoke with you. And he goes, now I'm sitting here, and he goes, listening to your story and what you've done and where you've been and what you've been through. He realized, I want to live today, and I'm worth something, and I'm a Marine, and I still have that. And I know that I can't quit on you, and I can't quit on the Marines. So I'm going to get my life together.
The moment where you were like, yep, this is why God kept me around. This is why I have to tell my story. This is why I am here, and I have to do this.
It wasn't a kinda, it was a hard backhand to the face. Yeah. Once we finished that, I got more from it than he did. I honestly feel very selfish in that conversation, because it was like my whole life changed. I called back my mortgage company at the time. I shut it all down. I shut all my businesses down completely, like overnight, turned them all down, and fully focused on my projects and my speaking and sharing my message, and said, I will not start another venture or go in another direction until I get this path squared away and I can find a way to marry them all together.
I mean, I say this a lot on a relatable journey, that you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. And you have the quintessential story of how this makes sense, because when you chose door number 2 and you chose life, and God told you that you have to share your story, you had no idea what that meant. I mean, none, because your life wasn't what it is today. So when you look backwards, are you just mystified? What goes through your mind when you look at the arc of your journey and how God used all this negative, all these terrible situations to help somebody save their life, and probably countless others to tell your story? What goes through your mind when you think about it that way?
I think there's two parts. One, heavy weighs the crown, because I still question sometimes, like, why me? But I've since then, I've told this story and changed so many lives and so many people, and I'm forever grateful. I mean, I can't express in words what it's like. I mean, as of yesterday, I had 30 people crying on a Zoom meeting telling the story, and how it made them feel. And I've gotten over 700 responses in the last 3 days of speaking engagements, where people have just said, you changed my life, you inspire. I mean, it's almost like I have, and I hate saying this, Will, because it sounds so arrogant, but it's like I have a direct, constant conversation with God through that. Like it's like he speaks to me all the time. It's not directly from him. It's through every person that says something that I changed their life. It's almost like a reminder for me. I'm like, oh yeah.
That's my prayer every time I do an episode of Relatable Journey, or I go on air on Fox. My prayer is, God, just use me as a mouthpiece. Yeah. Just make me your mouthpiece. And I know that if that happens, whatever comes out of my mouth is going to be good. You are God's mouthpiece. That's literally what you are. And it's incredible.
People ask me, how do you stand up on stage and speak to so many people? And I was like, I don't. I was like, I don't. It's like a little hands in my back, and I'm just opening my mouth and the words are coming out. I get nervous and scared every single time, and I know it doesn't look like it, but the second it starts and I tell this story, it's almost like I'm just surrounded by his love and compassion and understanding, and saying, you don't have a choice, knucklehead. Like, this is what you got to do. And it's not, I don't want to say it's easy, because it's not, but when you have the opportunity to share something like that, you have to. It's an obligation.
Not to put a damper on the mood here, but when we create relationships with a human being or with God, it's the same in the effect that if it's surface level, It's super easy. The deeper you go, the more difficult it gets. So your relationship with Jesus has gotten deeper. What issues or problems or worries do you have today that you didn't even know would have existed X amount of years ago before you even had a relationship? What are your struggles now today in your journey?
Well, when you go through an accident like that and you don't adjust the trauma correctly, and you do like I did, the way that I did, which I don't recommend doing, and you bury it, it becomes a bigger problem later on, and for me, telling this story, like it's kind of bittersweet. So telling this story today to the audience and to you, you'll look at it like a way to find inspiration. I'll be grateful that God allowed me to be this conduit. However, it does bring dark problems for me. I have to relive this horrible experience of people trying to murder me on a day-to-day basis. I have to sleep with it. I have to feel the pain and injuries that I have on a daily basis that people don't know about. The lack of use of my arm, the nerve pain, the mental side of it, as I start to peel these layers back more and more. And the more I tell it, the more I remember specific things. And you have to understand, like, the pain comes with the story. It's not like I tell the story and there's nothing there. As I tell you that the scalpel and they put the tube in, I can feel that scar, all three of those scars, and that pain. When I share something with you and my hand starts to shake because the nerve damage is so bad in it, and I try to hold my hand a certain way, there's pain there. So there is a dark side to it, because I'm constantly reliving this horrible experience of death, on that surface level. And I'm having to tell people, and at the same time, you do get a little selfish. You're like, could I just maybe not have to do that, and we can find a different avenue that doesn't remember what he said, or you're going to feel a lot of pain and you're going to have to tell the story. And that's what it's like. It's on a day-to-day basis. It's constant mental pain, struggle pain, and physical pain.
I wonder if he uses that, because I never thought about it like that, honestly, because I love hearing your story. And I'm like, well, that's a little selfish. You're making this guy talk about the worst day of his life over and over again. Way to go, Will. But I know that so many people get so much out of it. I know I get a lot out of it. I know God has had it happen for a reason, and he's using you for that. And I wonder, and I don't know if you've thought about this or not, if he uses that pain to say, hey, you got to keep trusting me. You got to stay with me on this, because I know it's not easy, but if you stay with me, it's easier and you'll see the reward.
Listen, you hit it gave me chills when you said that, and only because I know the answer. As we obviously, because of corporate greed and marketing and all that fun stuff, pain is automatically associated with the devil, right? Like, we just think if it's bad, if it's painful, it's horrible, it's got to be the devil. And believe it or not, God's a lot like a Marine, man. He likes to put you in pain a lot of times to help you remember.
Only a
Exactly
Marine would say that.
There, right? That's what it's like. It's like that constant embrace the suck. It's going to be painful, but you got to do it. You got to head forward. You got to be a leader. And I think, when I do a lot of topics on leadership, I think that's the pain. That's the part that we forget, is that leadership is not sexy. It's not supposed to be fun. Some of us are selected to be a leader, and sometimes all of us, when we're parents. And unfortunately, it's not always fun and enjoyable. And you have to take some pain, like working out, pushing yourself in the gym. And the outcome is either whether it's your body or how you feel or what you do, or for me, it's making an impact, in people's lives. I mean, though I feel a lot of pain when I get 600 messages from people that say, today I wanted to live, man, there's no amount of pain that I can take that will ever override the feeling that I get from knowing that I helped save another life. So I'm willing to take that. I'll take it. Bring it. I'll take the pain. Let's roll. Doesn't mean I won't complain about it, but I'll take it. I'll take it.
Speaking of pain and complaining about it, real quickly, you're doing a world record amount of push-ups in 24 hours, and you're going to do it on the Marine's birthday?
Yeah, it's gonna be 12 hours. Okay. And I have to do 19,325 push-ups in 12 hours.
What does that work out to be a minute?
It's like 27 a minute for 12 hours straight.
That's insane. And it's all to spread awareness for the homeless veterans. And this is your way of doing that. Do you ever wonder if God was like, you don't have to do it this way. There's other ways you can do it. You and I joked last time, like join a taco eating contest or something and draw awareness that way.
Yeah, and I'll share with you I'll share with everyone exactly what I told you. I would, on the surface, I'm sure it looks pretty selfless, but it's not. It's 100% selfish. It's the only way I can get as close to that experience of dying, enduring that. It's like conditioning of pain. When I did the world record I broke this year for the push-ups, and then I did 11 hours and did 16,000 plus push-ups, and I'm going through that. It was a lot of, man, I couldn't feel my arms and hands for a week. My fingers are still kind of numb from it. And you got to remember, like, I'm 100% disabled veteran. I have, severe nerve damage, loss of, 60% of my right arm. There's a lot of challenges I have to go through to endure that pain and to push through. So it sucks. But it's very selfish, because for me to go that extra level is just kind of like the closest way I could get to dying, I guess, and being able to try to find a way to share that moment, that just kind of like right there, that fine line, handstands on the rim of hell sort of thing, like just really trying to get as close to it as I can. And that's what it's like during some of these world records.
All right, so these push-ups, how many of your Marine buddies have gotten your ear about what the Guinness Book World of Records just defines as a push-up? Because listen, it's more of a pulse. I'm not saying I could do it. I'm not going, I could do like a dozen of these things. But how much do you get your buddies in your ear about the fact that it's more of a pulse than you're going all the way down, all the way up type deal?
I don't get it from my Marine Corps guys, because
Really?
we know that the objective is to raise money. So if you want to take your happy little butt out there and do your full push-ups, you're more than welcome to. Like, it is what it is. I get it a lot from the other branches, the military push-up, the expectations of all the way up, all the way down. And I've actually been asked that question quite a bit when it comes to it. And I'm like, if you're the type of person that's focusing on the difference between whether I'm doing it all the way up and all the way down push up, and not on the fact that a dead person is doing this to raise money for those who need it the most, then you need to have a conversation with God.
Not only that, but you're probably not doing anything to help anyone if you're criticizing somebody else to that degree. But I just was wondering if any of your buddies just give you grief.
No, they all know me. They know. I always joke with them and we go back and forth. But no, Marines are usually pretty good about that. But they know, my group knows why I do it. So I don't get as much heat.
To wrap this up on a relatable journey, what is your one message that somebody is listening or watching this right now you want them to take away from your journey?
Well, it's very specific and very niche. So for those of you dads out there that have little girls in your life that you're a father to, I will tell you, of all the places and things that I've done within the homeless community, child trafficking, abused women, everything, 99% of them, the father's not involved in their life. And unfortunately for them, they go out and they chase all the wrong things and they go in the wrong direction. And we as dads need to do a way better job across the country today to understand that the foundation of our family starts within the household, and it starts at the dinner table. And it starts with the father being a great father and being attentive to a young woman's needs, to encourage her, to inspire her, to know that no matter what, her father will always be there for her, to make sure that she'll be a proud, strong woman, and dig as many holes as you need to in the backyard for all the boys, whatever you got to do. But be a dad, be there for her and love her. And because today, listen, out of all the stuff I've done, all the things that I talk about, my life experiences, for me, if I had to ask why God put me here, it's to be a father to my little girl. And everything else is just great.
Wow, that's an awesome story. I love that little anecdote right there, T-Shane. You're the man, brother. I appreciate you popping on a relatable journey. Yeah. How do people find you online? What's your info?
Yeah, so social media, all social media, my handle is at T-Shane Johnson, and you can visit my website at tshaneinspires.com.
And just so everyone knows, it's Timothy Shane Johnson. His born name wasn't T-Shane, just so everyone knows. Yeah. Thanks, brother.
You got it, sir. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on a relatable journey today. Now we need your help. We want to get this in front of as many people as possible. In order to do that, we got to please the algorithms on all these platforms. This is how it works. You got to follow or subscribe on your platform and then leave a 5-star rating and write a review. I know it can be a lot, but please help us out with this. Because of you, this is a relatable journey.